Hello and welcome to the sixthaxis.com. I'm Stefan, and yeah, it's been pretty much a week since we took delivery of the Nintendo Switch 2 for the first time and started checking out Nintendo's very latest generation of console, hybrid or otherwise. And this has been a really interesting console to take a look at. It is much more powerful than the original Nintendo Switch. You've got a big new exclusive game in Mario Kart World, but is that all it is? Is it just a more powerful Switch and a Mario Kart machine? Or can it be much more than that? So let's dive in with our look at the console, the hardware, all of the software and improvements, and also all of the games that are actually on it right now. It starts with the hardware itself. While the Switch OLED was able to improve on the original design, bringing more solidity to the body, a more robust kickstand and a better quality screen, the Switch 2 is able to kick on in areas that the OLED couldn't. The screen is much larger, jumping from the original 6.2 inches and the OLED's 7 inches to a much more modern feeling 7.9 inches. And this increases the height of the console in the process. There's also a new profile that is more gently rounded towards the back but has got a sharper edge to the flat-faced front. The kickstand has also been iterated on from the Switch OLED's design, using the same adjustable hinges but having a cutout foot instead of the whole lower half of the back panel flapping out. It does feel a little bit flimsier, but this is effectively just as sturdy in practice. Of course, we don't have an OLED screen on the Switch 2, it's a reversion back to using an LCD panel, and while this is a downgrade in screen technology, it is still a vast improvement from the original Switch. This is now a 1080p panel, it can do 120Hz with VRR, and there is a limited form of HDR. No, it's not amazing HDR, but it does have an effect. The laminated screen also brings the picture right up to the glass, giving much better contrast and blacks, while also being powerfully bright and vibrantly colourful. It is a nice screen, but it is one that will almost certainly be succeeded by a premium OLED revision down the line. But part of the cost of having a larger screen, alongside the new chipset within the Switch 2, is that battery life has slid back to a 2 to 6.5 hours range. This is much less than the Switch OLED and roughly equivalent to the original Switch. This is obviously heavily dependent on how taxing the game is that you're playing, and the brightness and the volume settings that you have, and a number of other factors. But this range does feel about right to us. You'll get a couple of hours of Mario Kart out of it before you start wanting to charge up. And that can be much more convenient thanks to having a USB-C at both the top and the bottom of the console. With the larger tablet body comes taller Joy-Con 2 on the side. These have got a much more rounded, softer feel in the hands, and they now attach with magnets instead of having a metal rail to slide into. They snap in and out of place in a very, very satisfying fashion. We will have to wait and see just how much creaking and flexing comes to affect these connectors over time, as they did with the original Switch, but the initial concerns over their durability can be put to one side. It is a kind of bizarre quirk, but you can actually attach Joy-Con 2 upside down and back to front, and the fact that this is possible through a purely symmetrical design is actually a good thing. It permits you to make mistakes when putting the Joy-Con on the console, and that actually makes things more difficult and less likely to break. Bigger Joy-Con 2 also allows for larger SR and SL rail buttons, so if you're playing with a single Joy-Con 2, these are now used directly instead of having larger buttons built into the wrist strap. There is even space on the rail for the optical sensor to enable mouse mode, which is admittedly a very niche feature for the Switch 2 at the time, but it is built into the system software and a limited handful of games at this point. Time will tell whether Joy-Con Drift has got a sequel. The Joy-Con 2 does not have Hall effect analog sticks, but the analog sticks do now have full-sized heads to match standard gamepad sizes, even if the actual height of the stick is still shrunk down. All in all, it's a nice console to have in hand. It is a good bit heavier than the original Switch, but that's to be expected, and it does compare favourably to the weight that you have with the likes of Steam Decks and other PC handhelds. Onto the software, and we have a light revision of the Switch UI. The games are now rounded squares instead of pointed, the system icons are now encased in a unified bar instead of being individual circles, and the highlighted icon now has a more animated colour to it instead of just a pulsing light. It is also significantly faster in very obvious areas. The Switch could just choke and die by simply loading into the eShop, whereas the new eShop on the Switch 2 just breezes through the massive lists of game icons. And when it comes to actually downloading stuff, having SSD performance from both the internal 256GB of storage and the new microSD Express standard allows you to download at full fibre internet speeds. Whether you're using the Gigabit Ethernet or Wi-Fi 6, the Switch 2 can pull down a game at up to 400 megabits per second, though we've found it to be more commonly in the 250 to 300 megabits per second region. And that's coming down using my gigabit internet speeds. It's not maxing out my connection, of course, but it is still very, very fast and more than good enough for what the Switch 2 needs. But you will want and need that speed for the larger games that we are seeing on the Switch 2. Hitman World of Assassination is 58GB, Yakuza 0 Director's Cut is 45GB, and if any of these gigantic games needs to patch, prepare yourself for the console to demand enough space to completely rewrite the entire game while updating. So the price of microSD Express cards cannot come down quickly enough. There are a couple of new ideas that the Switch 2 brings to the table though: Game Chat and Game Share. Game Chat is Nintendo finally getting on board with having built-in voice chat. They even dedicated a whole button to it, and it works pretty well within the company's typically constrained system. The first hitch can come when enabling game chat in the first place, which is an opt-in feature, and this requires a phone number to be attached to your Nintendo account in advance. Without that, you can end up with a blank white screen that offers no help, with the unstated fix being to go to the Nintendo account page using a web browser, adding a phone number, and then trying again. Once you do get past that, then you manually approve which of your friends you like enough to want to actually talk to, adding a further layer of kind of privacy and security to the system, in addition to still using abstracted friend codes. Once you've jumped through all of those hoops though, voice chat is, well, it's fine. The audio quality from the built-in microphone does an okay job of relaying what people are saying to you. It's very thin and weedy though, especially from across the other side of the room. And so you will be best off using an actual headset. What's curious is that the desire to have the chat tiles along the bottom of the screen shrinks the play screen down above it, and so it's now more like a Zoom call where the main tile is your game. This is acceptable when you're playing on a large TV, but you really feel the shrunk down play area when you're in handheld. Thankfully, there are 3 layout settings, so you can have smaller thumbnails or just have the game full screen while anybody that's speaking is highlighted by their name in the top corner. Of course, the intention for this is that people have their cameras turned on and that they're sharing their game screen. I do like having the camera enabled, and it's a bit of fun for Mario Kart where your face also appears in-game. And the camera does work with the NVIDIA-powered features to track your face, to blur backgrounds, and things like this. But when everybody's gameplay is also streaming, it comes through at just about 10 frames per second, and this is much more of a distracting judder than it should be. All of this could be made much more elegant. It is a decent start, and if it doesn't change at all, then I think this is a good addition to the Switch 2 software regardless, but I do also hope that it will be improved over time. Game Share, meanwhile, is the Switch 2's replacement for DS Download Play, and it's a cleverly adapted take on PlayStation's Share Play and Steam's Remote Play together. The host will invite players to join them for Game Share. The Switch 2 then renders and streams the game for everybody else's devices, but there is a unique twist here in that every player can have their own view of the game instead of sharing the full screen. In 51 Clubhouse games, for example, you can all have your own secret hand of cards. In Fast Fusion, you each have a full view instead of having the split screen. Well, I say full, but there is an infuriating info bar announcing that this is Game Share at the top of your screen, and this actually shrinks your view, and I do not understand this. Why, Nintendo, is this not just a kind of a bubble in the corner of the screen or some other even more innocuous piece of UI? Even so, Game Share puts an ingenious twist on this concept, doing something that nobody else is. even if it is inherently limited. GameShare has to be enabled by developers on a game-by-game basis, and within that it's specified whether games can be shared via local Wi-Fi, whether it can go via game chat, and whether it can work back to the original Switch as well. The encoded stream is pretty decent, it is using Nvidia's chipset after all, but it can struggle with something like Fast Fusion, where the world is whizzing by at lightning speed. And so we turn to the games, and this is where we see the Switch 2 currently at its weakest. Mario Kart World is the only truly essential game for this console right now, although anti-grav racing connoisseurs would argue for Fast Fusion. Aside from that, current Switch 2 gaming is really all about the upgrades, the ports, the patches and backwards compatibility, and the future holds plenty of cross-gen games as Nintendo will want to try to cling on to the vast Switch player base for as long as possible. It's not as exciting, but the Switch 2 does hold up very well in the comparisons that third-party ports offer. Cyberpunk 2077 Ultimate Edition is a very good port that makes the most out of DLSS to deliver 1080p 30 pretty consistently on Switch 2, and that compares very favourably even to the Xbox Series S, even if the Switch 2 is more limited with resolution and performance targets. Hogwarts Legacy is just so much closer to the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X and S version of the game, and Yakuza 0 is a good port of a game that really doesn't trouble the Switch 2 in the slightest. Then there's all of the games that have received Switch 2 patches, and there's more coming as time passes. We're lumping in the paid Switch 2 editions of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom here, alongside free updates to ARMS, Super Mario Odyssey, Link's Awakening, and just this week, Splatoon 3. And they all come with a range of improvements, from resolution bumps to improved frame rates, added HDR, and the addition of GameShare in multiplayer titles. The difference, of course, is going to be more noticeable in some games than others, typically where there's been poor performance in the original release. The stuttering of Link's Awakening has been vanquished. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are jumping up to 60 FPS, and Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, well, it's just a night and day difference and really highlights how staggeringly naff it still is on the original Switch. But then there is the rest of the Switch back catalogue, all of the games with troubled performance and the quote-unquote impossible ports. The Switch 2 runs these games through a translation layer similar to Apple's Rosetta and Valve's Proton, dynamically translating calls to match new APIs and chip capabilities to what is in this new console. And the results can lift a lot of games with that troubled performance out of the mire. Bayonetta 3 is basically a locked 60 FPS now, instead of lurching back and forth in the 40s and 50s. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity locks to 30 FPS and seems to have a much better base resolution, and Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes just shoots up to 60 FPS with its unlocked frame rate, and the list goes on and on and on. The impact will be constrained by the frame rate caps and the resolution limits that developers have put in place for the original hardware, so all of these games could still benefit from having a patch to add Switch 2 appropriate performance profiles, or, if they really feel the need, Switch 2 editions and remasters. But at the base level, this is just a massive improvement. The Switch 2 then is an accomplished sequel. It takes the core of the Nintendo Switch and improves it in practically every way possible, from the vibrant new screen to the magnetic snap of the Joy-Con 2 and the core features like game chat and having a usable eShop on the console. Of course, there's some typical Nintendo quirks and limitations, but that is par for the course, and in general, this now meets the expectations of a modern console in the way that the Switch often didn't. What the system needs now, though, is more new games. Mario Kart World is the highlight at launch, backed up by ports of older third-party titles, patches, and the innate backward compatibility improvements, and they ably show the capabilities of the new hardware. But the excitement will come as Nintendo flesh out the library with more exclusives in the coming months and year. I hope you've enjoyed this pretty extensive look at the Switch 2, though it is obviously a week after launch. A lot of you will already have it, and I appreciate anybody that has stuck through to this point in the video. If you have done so, then you probably already have, but make sure to like, subscribe, click the bell icon to get notifications, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Goodbye!